Now, Mark, let's come back to you. And well, RFK Jr. Continues with his presidential campaign, but he's increasingly under attack.
Oh, major attack. This is a textbook case, you might say, of the mass media cartel attacking a Kennedy. Now, you would think the Democrat establishment, the liberal establishment, would at least be reasonably welcoming to a Kennedy, yes, a Kennedy, running for president, no less. Whether it's wise for another Kennedy to run for president, we all know maybe that's not so wise. The Kennedy retirement plan can be a little rough, you might say. But here, this is New York Magazine on this slide here. And this is part of Advanced Publications, about a 100-year-old media conglomerate that owns Condé Nast, and Condé Nast in turn operates that magazine, New York Magazine. And so they're calling Kennedy a conspiracy-spewing kind of guy, rather crude language to say the least. And on this slide here, this begins the article. While waiting for his plate of meatloaf, gravy, and an iceberg wedge at an empty restaurant in Concord, New Hampshire on the first day of June, RFK Jr. was gently explaining to me, the reporter for New York Mag, that nobody knows whether HIV is the sole cause of AIDS. And I wrote there with my stylus, larger questions omitted. Basically, what that's about is that it's popularly known and it's often widely discussed that HIV may not be the sole cause of AIDS. And New York Mag is acting like that's an unforgivable sin, even to make that casual statement, which many others have made, not just RFK Jr. And so it's more of this browbeating and brickbat throwing that the mass media syndicate is so good at, rather than asking questions itself. And so it's a very unwelcoming atmosphere. As we saw, the picture of Kennedy on that cover was quite almost sinister looking. And I mentioned Advanced Publications. I don't know that we need to look at this slide. Advanced Publications is also a major shareholder in Charter Communications. That's just a brief mention. Charter Communications was involved in buying up a lot of independent cable companies that used to be fairly independent across the United States, and now it's a much more consolidated cable company, cable TV apparatus. So it's much harder to have public access programming. There's names like Spectrum and others that are pretty much monopolistic. And so this is a major media company that's coming after Kennedy. Anyway, this is a little bit more of the writing of this illustrious writer for this magazine. That HIV infection causes AIDS is long established science, but the conspiracy theory Kennedy is laying out, alongside several of its associated tendrils, has deep roots and has borne tragic fruit. And there's a claim here that a South African leader was also skeptical of the HIV theory of AIDS and supposedly denied medications to the population there, and some people died. The mythologies that RFK is talking about, according to this writer, are the chronological starting points for opinions Kennedy puts forth in his 2021 book, The Real Anthony Fauci, Bill Gates, Big Pharma, and the Global War on Democracy and Public Health. And then the writer is trying to say that these are disproven arguments in Kennedy's book about Fauci. But everyone I've talked to, a lot of people, plus my own reading, I beg to differ. Virtually every page in that book is footnoted with sources, exhaustively sourced, in fact. And you can read just about every page of that book on Fauci and come away with the unmistakable impression that Fauci is literally of criminal intent. And so that New York Mag would go this far to try and, blindside RFK Jr., I think tells a lot about the establishment fearing that someone intelligent about the vax issue might get into public office with the Kennedy name in his favor, of course. And we can move on from there. COVID, like the AIDS epidemic before it, provided fertile ground for conspiracy theorizing. So here again, the magazine is trying to tie any alternative views about AIDS into alternative views that were out there about COVID. And therefore, it's kind of a guilt by association approach. and Kennedy happens to be in the crosshairs at this point in time. And we need not look at that slide. I think we can move on from there. And this is kind of interesting. Kennedy crowed to me, the reader the writer of that magazine, about his horseshoe coalition gathered around a campaign he views as fundamentally populist. And listen to this language here against Kennedy. And it's quite a band he has put together. Crunchy Whole Foods shopping anti-vaxxers, paunchy architects of hard-right authoritarianism looking to boost a chaos agent, Nader Stein third-party perma gremlins, some Kennedy family superfans, and rich tech bros seeking a lone wolf to legitimize them. Their convening gives the impression of weightiness, but if you so much as blow on them, this alliance would shatter into a million pieces. The only thing that seems to bind them together is Kennedy, the current embodiment of a warped fantasy of marginalization and martyrdom that has become ever more appealing and thus politically significant in an age of disinfo and distrust in government and institutions. So one could just summarize this by saying that there's a big fear among the establishment, rather than embracing the liberal traditions of the Kennedy family, which granted is a little bit more conservative version of liberalism, but rather than embracing the Kennedy mystique, the Kennedy tradition, the establishment is going all out against him, not just for who he is, but for the kinds of questions he's asking. So it's very illustrative of the political climate here in the United States. But RFK notably was supposed to be at that independent convention that I covered in Texas that I just posted the article for. And that convention is putting out the message that the media and dominant party establishment doesn't want to hear, that people are going to bolt those parties. They're going to put aside the mass media syndicate, and they're going to go with new media and new parties. And Kennedy represents that. And incidentally, his campaign manager is Dennis Kucinich, the former Cleveland mayor and former Ohio congressman that I interviewed at the Texas convention. And I believe that interview is posted.
Yeah.
So Kennedy is part of a bigger movement here that the establishment fears.
Yeah. Okay. Brilliant. Thank you, Mark. Right. Let's move.